You're listening to the She Renovates podcast. You're listening to She Renovates, the podcast for women who want to renovate to create an income and a life they love.
Good morning, everyone. Bernadette from She Renovates, and I have to apologise. I'm going to read today's intro because we have a special guest and I want to honour her with an appropriate introduction.
No, it doesn't have to be perfect, Bernadette. It's fine. Yes, go for it.
Ever felt weird about wanting more money, more freedom, or more joy? Today's guest is going to change that for you. Denise Duffield-Thomas is a money mindset mentor who has helped over 10,000 entrepreneurs break through the fears and stories that keep them playing small. What she teaches is at the heart of every woman in our community who is building something bigger than herself. Because before the deals, the projects, and the profit, there's a mindset. And if that mindset is broken, nothing else works. So whether you're just starting out or you're already renovating and wondering why success still feels out of reach, this conversation is for you. Denise helps people release their fear of money and create a first-class life. Her book, Lucky Bitch, Get Rich, Lucky Bitch, Get Rich, Lucky Bitch, and her newest, Chill and Prosper, give a fresh and funny roadmap to living a life of abundance without burnout. She's a self-proclaimed lazy introvert, a Hay House author, and an unbusy mother of 3. She lives in the east coast of sunny Australia with her family and 2 fur babies.
Oh, 4 fur babies now. We've got cats now. I need to update that on my bio.
Oh, gosh.
So just for fun. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, fur babies, we've all got to have those.
Add more
I
clean.
have one, but there you go. So Denise, we work with women between 40 and 70 who have discovered some point in their life that they're not well enough prepared for retirement, or they're just over what they're doing and they want to create an alternate way of earning an income.
Mm-hmm.
And your topic is very relevant because, as you would know, financially, Australian women aren't doing great, and we come up against those challenges every day. And so something that I sort of believe is that a lot of our financial challenges are really created by us, in that we have devoted our lives to our families and the people we care about and not given enough attention to our own financial well-being. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I'm really curious to know, did you ever feel that, were you ever in that position, or were you sort of automatically enlightened financially?
Oh, God, no.
Okay.
No.
Really to know your journey, through that sort of, the concern about whether you're being selfish, if you're wanting to be more financially independent, and, the guilt thing.
Oh, well, the guilt is huge. And you're right. It is so much about ourselves and our self-inflicted money blocks, but that doesn't mean it's our fault. You think of what we've been conditioned as women to always share, and there's studies, banks have done studies about this, about even that little girls get less pocket money sometimes than boys do. So these things are baked into the system, as well as the fact that most of us have probably never seen examples of that in our own lives, where it was kind of rare, I think, for mothers and grandmothers to have full-time jobs, let alone their own thriving businesses, unless they were seen as kind of for pin money. My nan was a seamstress. She did so many things, but she would never have considered herself an entrepreneur. She had to do that for survival, right? So I was born in Manly. My mum was really young when she had me, and she was a single mum for most of our life, mostly on welfare, because, as a single mum, it was really, with no education, it was really hard for her to make money. And also, she wasn't in a time where she could do stuff on Zoom or do stuff around, having kids. So I think I saw from a really young age, not just from my mum, but from my grandmother as well, and all my aunties, as the oldest child and oldest grandchild, they drummed into me all the time. They just always talked to me about, not about money per se, but it was always like, make your own money, be independent, don't rely on anyone else. And we always take things a little bit to heart too much. Like I actually am a little bit too hyper independent from that because I got that message, but at the same time, I didn't get any money education. Like most of us never did. My mum, 80s and 90s didn't have any credit cards. We never spoke about money, but we lived this real feast to famine kind of life where my mum was extremely lucky. She'd always win money at bingo or she'd win a meat raffle or something lucky would kind of come out of the blue. And it would be like, great, we'll have the nice yogurts and we'll have, lots of stuff. But then it was always quite lean and we moved around a lot. And I think I never learned any lessons from that except for like money's kind of easy come, easy go. And you just have to have a lot of jobs and you just have to be scrappy. And that was my experience, I think, in my 20s. But on top of that, that's when credit became available. I didn't know how to deal with that. I got into credit card debt. I didn't understand interest rates. I didn't understand savings. But I think what always has driven me as an entrepreneur is this thing of I want to make my own money. I don't want to be reliant on anyone else. I never really fit in corporate jobs. So I would kind of be in a job for a while because I interviewed really well, like a lot of creative women. We'd be like, yes, I'll be who you want me to be. And I'd get bored and quit. And so I don't think my career really got started until my early 30s when I went into coaching. But I was always really passionate about personal development. And actually, in my 20s, I loved reading books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I bought my first property at 25, just before the global financial crisis.
Oh, no.
Yeah, because the banks in the UK were doing 104% loan to value mortgages. 104%. So they actually gave you money. They gave you money to furnish the house. So Mark and I, we borrowed £1,000 off his mum to pay for the closing costs. And that was our first property at 25 in London. But I had no idea about money, none. And I think it wasn't until I started in the world of coaching and I was like coaching entrepreneurs, coaching, anyone. And I was like, everyone seems to have all of these blocks around money. And so I kind of then started merging some of the personal development stuff that I'd always been obsessed with into money and just really gone into an exploration. And I'm not an accountant, I'm not a financial advisor. I don't set myself up as an expert on money. What I am, though, is someone who's really curious about connecting the dots for women to say, look at some of our past experiences and see how this is impacting us today. And how can we choose something different? And how can we feel more confident talking about money like we do any other part of our lives where we're such problem solvers? And give ourselves permission to profit from our creativity in ways that our mothers and grandmothers weren't able to do. Because they were just as creative as us, right? But they didn't have the mechanisms to be able to do it. So I do that through my books and my courses. And I just love talking about money.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. In terms of, so what I've got from that conversation is that you don't really see yourself as a money expert. So you see yourself as someone who's able to generate money. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I identify very strongly as an entrepreneur, and I always have. But for me, the reason why I chose the word mentor and not coach is because a lot of the time, especially in the work that I do with my books and my courses, I'm not in a coaching relationship necessarily with people. I've got communities and things, but I'm like, I like to think of myself as a friend and a mentor, but also someone who is holding the space for us to be able to have these conversations and to be really curious. And I think I'm good at helping people connect the dots on things too. So I love digging into people's lives and seeing, what experiences have come up and like, where is that Where is that playing out? I also love talking to people in different industries because sometimes people will go, well, it's different in my industry, like we have real problems or we have restrictions. And I also love talking to people from different countries because there'll be money blocks that are common in industries, but also common in countries. And it's just
Yeah.
fascinating to see all the differences play out.
Have you seen any commonalities in Australia?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, let me talk about some of the other ones first, because one of the things I saw recently was like British money blocks, right? British people love to queue up. That's a real kind of cliche, right? They love a queue. They love taking their turns. So then it's like, where do you feel like you have to wait your turn and do things in a very linear way in your business? And it can be very much like, oh, well, my mentor earns this, so I can't surpass them. I have to wait my turn. And then for Australia, what I like to do with a country is to go, what are our spoken values and our unspoken values, right? So I'll sometimes go to like a government official website to see, what are the values of the country. And for Australia, it's like fairness and equality and egalitarianism. And our unspoken values around that, it's like mateship, tall poppy syndrome,
Mm.
right? So what I see sometimes in Australian businesses is people wanting to be everyone's mates, right? Wanting to be everyone's friends. And I was speaking to some construction guys who own their own construction firms, and they're like, but my dad was on the tools until he was 80. So I need to be on the tools as well. I need to show the youngest apprentice that I'm not too good to do it. And it's like, wow, this is such an Australian value, right? We don't want people to think that we think we're above them because we're everyone's mates. How that played out in my business was fascinating because I've always had a very US centric business. And I think it's because when I was starting my business, I was living in the UK, but I was going to conferences in America. So I kind of, and I charge in US dollars. I write in US English as well because everything's geared to them. But I was like, oh, I can't charge Australians. Like I was like, they're my mates. But then I was like, oh, but do I include Kiwis in that? Because they're kind of our mates too. And then I was like, but then British people are like our cousins. And then I was like, but Canadians are in the Commonwealth. And I was like creating all these like mateship things of like, well, I can't charge them and I can't charge them. And I think that's what sometimes happens with us in Australia is that we go, well, they're my friend, but then our clients become our friends. And then we don't want to be too successful. We want to downplay things. So I do see that a lot. But what's also fascinating is sometimes you look at the culture of your city or town or your country and you see where you're out of step with that. Because some people will say, but I'm not that. And you go, yeah, but has that then made you feel like different? Has that made you feel self-conscious? Has that made you shrink a little bit because you feel like you're out of step with that? Even looking at different eras of women as well and seeing like what media were you watching at formative years, right? So I mean I'm 46, so I grew up watching reruns of Bewitched and what was the other, I Dream of Jeannie, right? Which were very 60s shows, but they were being
Yeah.
replayed in the 80s. And the theme of that was you can be really magical, but you better not show anyone, and you better not use your magic powers to save yourself any time or energy. You got to do it the hard way. And like their husbands were always like, why did you use your magic powers to clean the house? You should do it, like a human. And I was like, it's a really fascinating thing to grow up with, right? And so I love to look at cohorts. I love to look at countries and backgrounds. And then there's so many nuances within that too, because you might have been born in Australia, but you might have immigrant parents. And so then you've got a little bit of their culture too. And that's when a lot of guilt will come up for women. They'll go, it was so hard for, my great grandmother. Who am I to earn money just, I don't know, doing something that's fun and fluffy and arranging cushions and painting walls or doing something that I love? It feels inappropriate. It feels a bit weird. So there's so many little elements that go into this work.
I can really identify this because I grew up in a really small town and I have often thought about the different mentalities that come out of that environment. So there are two different, like For myself personally, there is no way I was going to stay there. Like we had a
Yeah.
tenant farm. The last thing I wanted was to marry a farmer and quick enough.
Yeah.
Really spread my wings and go and see what the world had to offer. And I wasn't alone. And so they're the go-getters. And then there's the other side of the coin that are the ones that don't want to expand and, their little town of 2,000 people is everything. Really intrigued me that we're made so different. Why is it that some are content with that and others aren't? And often you see like high achievers come out of those sorts of environments. And, like, I'm just trying to think of an example. And, the really bad example, it's the only one I can think of, is Spike Milligan came from Woi Woi.
What?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
He described as the only living morgue. Yeah, but so anyhow.
Well, I grew up on the Central Coast too, so I know Woi Woi very well. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so let me see So some women feel like they're starting too late,
Mhm.
uh, like they've missed their window. What do you say to a woman who's sitting on a brilliant idea and keeps waiting until she feels ready or qualified enough?
Here's the dilemma. There's never any perfect age to be a woman. I heard this, when someone was talking about in Hollywood, they're like, there's never a perfect age to be a woman in Hollywood. I think there's never a perfect age to be a woman in business. I think though that this is so internal because I remember thinking at 28, I was like, I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30 and it's too late for me, ridiculous. And I remember someone's looking at me and going, oh my God, you're so young. And then I had this experience this week in tap class because I go to adults tap, adults ballet class. And, I was just wearing a leotard and one of the ladies who's 75, she said to one of the others, she goes, look at Denise's lovely back. And then I went, oh, thank you. And they said, you're so young. Enjoy it. And I was like, I just went, oh my God, this is such a beautiful illustration. Because as an adult ballet school, we'll go dance somewhere and you'll have all these kids and they go, we didn't know that grannies can dance. Like they're shocked at how old we are, right? And so it's always relative. Like, are we too young, too old for what?
Yeah.
And, I think like the age that I'm at now, 46, I've been like, this is a hard time for me with my kids. I'm super busy, right? And so there was a point where I said unbusy in my bio. I'm like, I've got to change that now because I've got a kid in high school and I've got to go to my Easter hat parade today for my other two kids. And I was like, maybe I'm too old. Maybe my window's passed for entrepreneurship. And then I kept on seeing this ad come up. It was Martha Stewart and she goes, I started my first business at 50 years old. And I was like, what am I thinking that this is a season. And there'll be seasons in your life where you have more mental energy, physical energy, intellectual energy. There'll be times where you have spaciousness to do different things. I would love to think of myself as someone who could write books in the future. I'm like, gosh, when I don't have kids at home, there's people who only wrote their first novel in their 60s and 70s because they didn't have the life experience to write it until then. And we put so much pressure on ourselves to do it all now. And you think men never think they're too old, by the way. Have you noticed that?
I have noticed that. I have.
They never think they're too old. They always they see themselves completely differently to what the reality is. And we're the other way around. We're always like, oh, we're so old and fat. And then you look back at photos and you go, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? If only I knew how lovely I was. And, back to the ballet example, I'll have women in there. I say, oh, you're going to join us in the concert. And they go, oh, I'm too old. And I'm like, well, you're not getting younger. Like, where do you think this is going? I'm like, you could get hit by a bus next year and you've never been able to be on a stage wearing a tutu. Like, what a tragedy. What a tragedy. I'm like, do it now. Because there'll always be someone. And, the ladies in my tap class who were 75, they said, our friends are so jealous that we can still tap dance because someone's looking at her and going, gosh, she's a spring chicken, this is amazing. So I think in whatever industry it is, um, there's always a place for you, and just try and just channel that energy of a very mediocre man with a beer gut who's just like, oh, I'm sexy.
Yeah. I think now, to be honest with you, I think we're quite privileged now. I don't think it's ever been a better time to be an older woman in business. And I certainly find in renovating, I've got 70-year-olds that are absolutely nailing it. And, but they're doing it very quietly. None of their friends know, you know, which I think is sort of sad. But yeah, there you go. So yeah, it's certainly not it's not in any industry other than a corporate life. Um, yeah,
Well, again, you look at men and CEOs, like there's never been a time really for my generation to step into those leadership roles because those men are still there in
yeah,
so many ways. And women, we do get better with age, and especially now with HRT, menopause drugs, women discovering later in life that they have ADHD, that they've been unmedicated for their whole lives. And I think so many times we've done all the work with one hand tied behind our back, right? And so it's like it is cool that we can do this now, and we've got the tools like things like Zoom and apps and things like that we don't have to figure out stuff by ourselves, and we don't have to do it all alone. I also think too, as you get older and you care less about what people think about you, you're better at delegating. And I think especially too, if you want to build a team and not do everything yourself, that is super, super important because you don't care about saying to someone, no, 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 that's not okay. Um, and that's something I think I really struggled with in my 20s. And I can see now each year I'm like, oh, I'm a little bit more direct. Oh, I'm a little bit more advocating for myself. And I can see that's just going to get and women in their 50s tell me that too. Oh, it will be so great. You don't care what anyone thinks of you. And I'm like, can't wait for that.
absolutely. And I think you made a very valid point that I just want to pick out. The whole concept of doing it with one arm tied behind your back. I think like when your children are smaller and you're, trying to care for aging parent, you've got a lot on you.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
as time goes on, those a lot they don't all fall away, but they become less sort of, less day to day. You're not having to take children to school and pick them up, and you do have some more freedom. And the fact that you've been able to achieve while you've been in that, you know, um, pressure cooker, I think really equips you well for your next step because
That's so true.
I think, I think as women, we should acknowledge that because, I think my view is the only thing stopping women from having what they want is what they believe about themselves, which is pretty much what you're saying as well, their confidence level. And so the sooner that
Yep.
you can really acknowledge where you're at and what you do have to offer, the easier it'll be.
Definitely. And that does equip you so well. I remember one of my friends, Amy, her parents renovated houses, and she said she did her homework every single day at an unfinished work site, basically. And you just think that's what we do. We just suck it up and do it. One thing though, if you are in a tricky time, an affirmation that really helped me actually, for those of you who still have children around or grandchildren as well as you're doing today, um, is babies bring abundance. And I just kept on repeating that to myself because I had a lot of fears about what having kids would do to my ambition and my time and my creativity. I really thought I was going to lose a part of myself. And so I just kept on saying, babies bring abundance, babies bring abundance. And it really helped me to realize, no, okay, I might not have as much time, but now I'm going to be really creative about how I spend that time. And actually, every single kid that I had, it did help me to bring in more CEO energy because I was like, I've got less time, so I have to put these boundaries into place. Things that people had been telling me to do for years, by the way. Fur babies count too. Anything that we can do to trick ourselves into having a better mindset really, really helps. And even if you've been dealt some hard hands, I say this to people with, chronic illnesses or physical challenges. Great. So you have to learn to delegate. You do. You can't do it all yourself. Um, and sometimes circumstances force us to do those things. And we can kind of, we have to be a bit delusional and see them as advantages sometimes.
I think I really love that. Babies bring abundance. And
hmm
I definitely feel like I've lived it. Certainly around, because I was renovating when our kids were like babies and it was tough. But as time has gone on, what they have brought to what I do is a massive richness. And so, yeah, I've seen it play out. And
And they see that work ethic as well, and they see, oh, wow, you can take something from this to that. I think it's a really inspiring example for kids to see that. Yeah.
absolutely, yes. Um, okay. Okay, so this is a good one. Women who
Yeah.
charge.
Yes. It's a
Okay,
huge
so
one.
I have noticed this about like women in our community who are, like will be going out and working on projects for someone else.
hmm
They they don't charge. They don't charge what they're worth. And secondly, now I don't know how to put this mildly, but I think we as women, when we employ women, should not be taking advantage of that.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember hearing something about some CEO going, oh, women are cheap. So they apply more women. I was like, Jesus, but it's showing that women are problem solvers and women think of, see more scenarios because they're thinking of more people. There's so many reasons to hire women. And undercharging is such a tricky thing because I've done it myself in my business, but I've also done it outside of my business. And it was really fascinating for me to see this play out recently, which you might think, oh, Denise, you've cracked this, and I did crack it in my business, but I made, because I'm, an adult dancer, I make costumes. And I remember thinking, oh, I was just like, oh no, I just do it for fun. Like I don't need to charge for that, you know? And the worst bit is not only did I put a low price on it, she didn't actually even pay me. And because she was like, "I'll get the money." And I was like, "Oh, no, I'll get it next time." And then I never brought it up, right? So I was like, "This is how it happens for women." I thought I was immune to it, and I was in one area. And this is what happens. We start to compartmentalize things. We go, "Oh, it's okay for me to charge for that because it's hard or I don't like it or it's official or it's using my degree." But that area, no, I can't charge for that because it's, and we all have our own little reasons why. For some people, it's like, but I enjoy it. I love it. It didn't take me very much time. It's not worth it. It was, it's not in my area of expertise, or anyone could do that. There's so many little exceptions, I think, that we find for ourselves. And I did it myself. I was like, oh, but I love doing this. It's my hobby. It's fine. But I've heard that from people who that is their full-time job and they still use that as an
Yeah.
excuse, right? And I think there's a big reason. Well, there's a lot of reasons why. There's a lot of studies again about this, that women little girls are encouraged and praised for being sharers, for sharing. And we're thinking about the collective. So it's not so simple of going, I give you this thing, you give me money, and it's a simple transaction. We're thinking about 50 layers deep in this. And we're also trying to think about the other person and what's their circumstance and what do I need? And we're thinking about all this all at the same time. The other thing that we're trying to do, because we're often consensus builders, and I hope no one's offended by me using generalizations, because there are studies that show that this is, it is a trend for women to do this, but we're also consensus builders. And so often what we're trying to do when we're pricing is we're trying to find a critic-proof price that everyone agrees is the right price, that everyone thinks is reasonable. They'll still like us. Anyone can afford it at any budget. And we're trying to do that because we want to keep the peace and we want to be consensus builders.
Yeah.
So you'll hear people say, I want to be affordable. And it's like, but affordable to who? Affordable to what? Because sometimes people value different things. It's not even so much sometimes someone's budget, it's sometimes they value design more than functionality. Sometimes people, want to impress other people. Sometimes they've saved for this one thing and they do want to splurge. We don't know what people's motivations are, and we don't know what they can afford. And also, you've probably experienced this, Bernadette. It doesn't matter what you charge, there'll always be someone who's unhappy. You can't please everybody because people cannot be pleased. So there's no point being a people pleaser.
I completely
Yeah,
agree. Yeah. And I think it also harks back to what you were talking about earlier around mateship. So we don't want to be seen as someone who's, not nice, that, you know, wants it all for themselves and, doesn't care about the other person.
absolutely. And we see so many examples of how destructive that is on our planet at the moment, of people who are greedy, who it's never enough, who cheat people and steal and, do all these horrible things, um, especially in the real estate industry, right? And so no one wants to be that person.
No.
But we overcompensate. And then what happens too, especially if you're such a people pleaser, I find that when you're in that energy, you often attract people who take advantage of that even further. And so it actually doesn't matter what you charge, but it's like you want to be an energetic match to people who respect you at that price point. And that's where the mismatch happens, because if we're unsure about it and then we're wishy-washy about payments and all that kind of stuff, that's what will happen. We'll attract that same energy back, and sometimes worse, where you get ripped off by people. And I've done that myself too, because I wanted to be um yeah, I didn't want to be thought of as a hard-nosed person, and so my good nature got taken advantage of many times in that. So it's a tricky thing, and what I really encourage people to do as well is don't think of this in all or nothing terms. There's no, like, you're allowed to be a kind person and still have boundaries. You're allowed to be um reasonably priced and still be out of some people's price range. And we have to hold all of those contradictions as being true, that you can be kind and still make money. It's a really
Yeah.
tricky one, but an affirmation, because I love affirmations. An affirmation that's really helped me is I serve, I deserve. I serve, I deserve, because it reminds you that it has to be balanced.
Yeah.
If you're someone who's just only giving, it's that analogy of, not putting your oxygen mask on. You can't sustain that. And so I serve, I deserve reminds you of, like, I'm not doing people a favor. They are paying me. I am doing value for them. We don't owe each other anything beyond that transaction. It's balanced, it's fair. And that's where you can kind of bring in that mateship thing and going, being fair doesn't mean that I'm taken advantage of.
No.
Being a good mate doesn't mean that I'm going to be, um, roll over. And it doesn't mean that it's not a respectful thing if I push back.
Yeah. So it's interesting what you were saying about the making the costumes. So when I
Mm.
first started my business, I really struggled with sales. And I have no problems being hard nosed about what I want for my renos, but it's a totally different kettle of fish when it comes to selling a program. And I've done quite a bit of work on it. And I identified a time in my life. So as when I was young, I was big sewer, loved sewing. Got my own sewing machine when I was 9. And I
Oh,
used
wow.
to
Yeah.
make clothes for the children in the neighbourhood. And one of our neighbours asked me to make some dresses for her little girl, which I did. And I was very competent, so they were well made. And when the lady came to pick them up, she said, "What do I owe you?" And my father said to her, "Oh, don't worry about it. Bernadette loves to sew." And and I really believe that that one incident really stamped me with that sense of what I do. And he wouldn't have intended that, but that
Of
was it.
course.
And I spent the rest of my adult life trying to work on it. So I completely get it. And I'm just curious to know, do you think that those challenges or beliefs, do they come out of a general sort of environment as you're growing up, or do they is that common for an incident to set the tone for the rest of your life?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this up because when people come and join my program, I get them to do an inventory of money memories, right? And I'll do some prompts and, most people can come up with some, but actually some of these surfaced later because they didn't seem important at the time, but that now you can really see the through lines. And I call this the OCP process. So it's like origin story, and then the C is consequence. So you've already done that work, right? You can
Yeah.
go, "Oh my God, I'm not allowed to charge for something. My labor is not important," right? The P of that is pattern interrupter. And so sometimes those things have happened so many times, they're just the flavor of your childhood. But sometimes those real specific incidences have created a decision that you've made. And you know what one of mine was? Someone would ask me when I was 8 years old, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be a dancer, but dancers don't make any money, so I'm going to be a businesswoman."
Oh my gosh.
I know, and I've only had to uncover that recently to go, I'm a dancer and a businesswoman, and to really embrace that. So the pattern interrupters can be so many different things. So one is the acknowledgement is so powerful, but you can kind of transmute that experience. And so you can have a really interesting thing. You could almost visualize, imagine what would have happened if I'd received money for those dresses and how accomplished and excited I would have felt. So you can almost go back and rehearse what that would have felt like. And it sounds really weird, but sometimes it's almost like a timeline shift. And you go, wow, imagine if I'd had that confidence from 9 years old that my labor is really valuable. And I've got goosebumps thinking about it because it
Me
does
too.
shifts things. And you go, holy shit, that does live inside me somewhere.
Yeah.
And that groove that I like experience, I can wear that away. That can no longer be a pattern for me. So that's powerful,
Because
right?
I've done a lot of work on it, but I often feel like I'm probably just putting icing on dog poo. It's still there.
Yes, it's
Just
still
sort
there.
of
Yeah.
hiding it over. Yeah. So
That's okay as well, because sometimes you have to come at it from multiple angles. So another good pattern interrupter, I used to think growing up in the 90s, Billabong for me, the shop Billabong,
yeah. Yeah.
was like, oh my God, only rich kids shop at Billabong, right? So to do a little bit of a healing and people talk about inner child healing, but inner teen healing can be very powerful too. So I remember going to Billabong and thinking, I was a millionaire at this stage, by the way. I was still like, I'm not cool enough and like rich enough to come in here. And I bought something for my inner teen. So you could buy something for your inner child.
Right.
And sometimes you only need it for a little while to like heal that experience
Yeah.
and not have it haunt you anymore.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can sometimes people love like a bit of a ritual burning, cleansing kind of energy. So sometimes if there's old things from like failed businesses or heirlooms or something that like symbolizes failure or symbolizes one of these experiences, you can declutter it, you can sell it, you can burn it, you can let that go. I actually find one of the best pattern interrupters though is community, because so many of us didn't see examples of what that would look like for a healthy transaction.
Yeah.
And it's monkey see, monkey do, right? And so this is why your work is so important too, because you might have someone, you said you've got a 70-year-old client who's renovating. If you've never seen anyone do that, it's isolating. But you're creating these communities where people go, it's normal to have these conversations about what shade of white is the best shade of white. And monkey see, monkey do, right? And so I think that's the same with money. I love to normalize the conversations of money. I love to talk about money because it is healing for us. It does interrupt our patterns because a big general thing I hear a lot is, people saying it's really impolite to talk about money. And if you were told that if you were told it explicitly, but also secretly and implicitly, it's hard to send invoices. It's hard to talk about money. It's hard to set your prices. But a pattern interrupter is hearing people like us talk about money. We're not combusting. Nothing bad's happening to us. We're allowed to talk money. We're nice, polite women. And that's a pattern interrupter too. So the media that you listen to, the podcasts, the books that you read, the communities that you're a part of can be amazingly healing pattern interrupters. So sometimes I'll say to people, go and find the memories first and connect them. Sometimes you can reverse engineer it and say, I'm really struggling with this one thing. Let's go and find it. Let's go and hunt for it. And an experience that happened to me, I was in a bra shop. I had to go buy a beige bra for an event where I was wearing a formal dress, and I needed one of those special bras that had the like really low things. And I remember I almost had like a panic attack in the dressing room, and I had to really go and unpack it a little bit because again, I was a millionaire at this stage. And I went, you're only allowed to have one beige bra. You're not allowed to have two, let alone a different category of beige bra. And it was that real feeling of like, but you've already got a pair of jeans.
Yeah.
I was only allowed one pair of school shoes a year, one school uniform a year, and that's really common for anyone who grew up, in a like financially restricted household. But it was like, I'm not allowed to choose. I'm not allowed to have more than one. I'm not allowed to have things that fit. I'm not allowed to really, truly choose, And so that was a really confronting experience. And now I was actually doing some laundry the other day and I was like, geez, I've got a lot of bras now. I've got different bras for different occasions. But there was like this thought of like, who the fuck do you think you are? Like the Queen of England? You're not allowed to
Yeah.
have a special bra just for an evening dress. Like, who are you? And so again, like you can go either way. Sometimes though, if you don't know, it is good to go and do a little bit of an inventory because you find more than you think. And I've had that for a lot of people. They'll say, I read your book. I didn't think I had any money blocks, but wow, you've really opened a can of worms here. And I'm like, yeah, but that's normal. Everyone has them and they never really truly go away either. But you can learn to understand them and you can go, oh, wow. But also, again, having community to go, geez, this just came up and I think this is why we're so good at that in every other context of our life. And for some reason, we think we're not allowed to do that same inquiry and sharing and storytelling with money because we've been excluded from that. But when you can do it, we're so good at it, right? And you already have just gone, oh yeah, because I had this experience and that feels like 80% of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So it's fun.
Can I just stop? I'm going to take this out of the recording.
Oh yes.
I've just thought I would like to ask you a question that demonstrates the impact of your expertise, and I just want to make sure
Mhm.
it's okay with
Oh gosh, you don't even need to cut this out. I'm really open about anything. So yes, please.
So
Please
I'd
ask this.
really love to ask you what would have been the most impactful story of someone who came to you or started your work with massive money mindset issues and completely nailed it.
Oh, I mean, I've heard thousands of stories by this stage.
Yeah.
And what I think though is really important for people to hear is that everyone's is so different and unique. And I don't think there's ever a point where you go, oh, I'm fixed and cured. I think part of this work is self-compassion and curiosity. And I call this like excavation work, right? Because we dig and we dig and we find a little juicy nugget and we go, oh my God, this is amazing. The idea of it though is that we can earn money while we're excavating. There's no time where we go, oh, it's all perfect and the land's all done and now I can do it. And I think that's similar with there's no perfect time, there's no perfect age, there's no perfect weight where suddenly you feel really confident to go out and do stuff because we're always going to have more and more excuses. So um and I know that didn't answer your question, but I think sometimes we think there's just going to be some magical moment or thing where the perfect version of myself will take over and I'll finally be done. And I'm like, we are works in progress forever. And there'll be things that you excavate and you go, I didn't really understand that. But you understand it like a decade later when you're at a certain time in your life where you go, oh, I see that so differently now. Oh, I see that so differently now. And it could be something, maybe you're at the age where your mother or grandmother was at when, you know, when they did something to you. And actually that experience with your dad, I have to really watch things like that now too, because I grew up with not very much money. My kids are very abundant. And so of course a lot of people go, I want my kids to have everything they want. And I'm like, but I don't. I want them to learn other lessons too around not restriction and lack, but you have to allocate your resources well and things like that, right? So I'm conscious of like, I'm probably going to give them money blocks in different ways than mine did, because there was a few times where I was like, oh, you don't need that because we're so wealthy. And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to give them the same thing that you just said, Bernadette, where it's like, no, your labor doesn't matter because you're so privileged and we don't need the money. I want them to have that experience.
Yeah.
And actually, this came up. They were selling cookies, it's not a school, but outside our house. And I remember thinking, but I can just buy all the cookies for them. I'll just buy them all, because I was like, I don't want, I don't know. I was like, I don't want the neighbors to, and I was like, but I'll give them that. And this is the experience of, I want them to experience that. And it's a real fine line, because my daughter was like, I'm going to sell these rocks that I'm painted. I'm going to sell them for $20. And I was like, don't say anything. Don't say anything. I'm like, don't give her a money block. And what I'm aiming for, and this is really cool for anyone who's got kids in their life, whether it's, kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, whatever, we're going to screw it up, right? So try and aim for as much neutrality as possible with money, because they're going to do jobs and things that we can't even dream of, right? So the best thing we can do is work on our own stuff, but not add any negative charge as much as possible to money. And so I'll say to the kids, oh, well, in our family, we do this. I'm trying not to make it like, well, they're wrong and they're right. And I'm trying not to entrench stuff, because I'm like, I'll just give them opposite money box to mine. I'm just like, well, in our family, we take care of money. And in our family, we're allowed to talk about money. And then my kid came home and she goes, we got to use the internet today. And I Googled you and you're a millionaire. I was like, oh, Jesus, like, how do I navigate this? So we will give them money blocks, right? But what I do notice though, is that sometimes they'll say things and I go, I didn't even tell them that. They've just observed that from me, advocating for my own business and being my own person. And they're taking that in more than anything I could sit down and share with them about money. And actually, for the first couple of years, they thought I ran a mummy boot camp, the mums. A mummy boot camp. And I was like, oh, Jesus. So yeah, be the role model and, look at your own stuff. And that's all we can do. And be curious and non-judgmental and kind to yourself. And I think that's where the inner child stuff is great too, because then you can go, if someone else told you that story, Bernadette, you'd go, oh, babe, of course. No wonder you struggle with this. This is great. I'm so happy we nutted this out. And I want us to have the same compassion we have for ourselves around that. I go, wow, of course it's hard for me to send that invoice. Yeah, my grandma told me millions of times that, it's so rude to talk about money. And if you talk about money, you'll go to hell. Oh, that's great. You go, oh, I can have that compassion. So I think that's the most important thing. Self-love and compassion. Yeah.
We're just coming, how are we going time? I think we're just about.
Yeah.
Well, yes, we are.
Yeah, we're myself. Perfect.
So I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. Some of the things that I'm taking away is I'm certainly going to go back and reenact that time in my life where I made a decision about money. And also I love your affirmations. Babies bring abundance and I serve, I deserve. And the other, just got to get this right because I can check the recording. OCP.
Yeah. Origin story, consequence, pattern interrupter.
Interrupt. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Well, so if people want to know more about you, where would you like us to direct your inquiries to?
Yeah. So my website's denisedt.com. I've got so many resources and articles and, there's a lot of places that you can go to there, whether it's pricing or mindset, whatever. I have a podcast myself too. It's called Chill and Prosper. So wherever you listen
I have
to
listened to it.
podcasts,
Yes.
people can search that and subscribe to that. So then they get a weekly episode. And then, social media, I'm Denise DT on Instagram. So I'm really easy to find. A really great, if you like reading books or listening to books, my books are on Audible as well as Kindle and paperback. You can also request your local library to get them in as well. And I think that's a really good place to start to go, what money blocks do I have? And start exploring that a little bit for yourself. So, and I really appreciate you bringing me on. I love talking to particular industries. I love property. I was trying to add it up before. I've bought and sold 14 properties since the age of 25. So for me, and I've done some good and some terrible, but one of the first courses I ever did, it was for a real estate company in East London too. So I love the industry. I love that more women are going into the industry. I think it's just such a beautiful thing to do. And I'm really so happy for your community to be able to have you as a mentor to guide them through that. And so for more women to be able to, build that wealth for themselves. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your lovely people.
Well, thank you so much, Denise. And all
Yes, I'll see you soon, I'm sure. Again. Bye.
the